If you've watched this channel for probably more than a handful of months, you'll know I'm a big fan of video game preservation, of being able to play a game later and have it work. I know that in today's gaming climate, that is somehow a mind-blowing, mind-numbingly hard to understand concept for both a lot of developers, companies, and even a lot of consumers who have just kind of been beaten down by terrible practices in the gaming marketplace that render your games obsolete after a year. Look at the constant yearly releases we see now. Even games that just get relegated to nothingness after a year or two. A lot of them are sports games, some of them are shooters, but I digress. It's just a thing that we see. Not to mention the fact that there are so many games that are now only really playable, even physical discs, with day one or week one or month one updates and patches that fix the game. That's ignoring online-only games, that's ignoring all kinds of other stuff. And why am I talking about that? Well, the Wii U is officially getting its death day announced. The Wii U E Shop will be shut down in 2023. I know that is about a year away, and it will be in March, according to Nintendo. Now, here's the thing, this also affects the 3DS, and I know that there are a lot of people who have moved on from these consoles and are never going back anyway, or a lot of people who were never interested in them. That's fine. It's not specifically about this console or the 3DS specifically, and more about the idea of it that I have a problem with. Now, a lot of people say digital games are forever, and I understand the sentiment because you can always re-download them, you can always get them again. This is something that I am concerned about for a lot of consoles, and a lot of consoles actually do have access to games for cheap that would otherwise be expensive unless you were to emulate them, or to download ROMs of them, or to have copies yourself and back up those ROMs. Now, that's a very legal, iffy area. The thing is, if you are downloading ROMs off of the internet, most likely no one cares and no one's going to go after you. But there have been people, especially hosting ROMs, that have been made examples out of, especially by a company like Nintendo. But what I find very hypocritical and ridiculous about this is that this shutdown is the exact reason why people emulate games. Now, I'm not talking about people who pirate games day one, like somebody who, and this is now such a statistical minority, but it does still happen. People who are not willing to buy Far Cry 6, so they find, an illegal copy of it, that kind of stuff, and they play it day one. I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm talking about people who want Donkey Kong Jr. Math. Now, I know that's a niche title that I'm digging at here, but that game itself is upwards of $200 for just the cartridge on eBay. But it's on the Wii U Virtual eShop for dirt cheap, real cheap. A lot of the games on that eShop, $10 to $15, even if they are hundreds of dollars in real life for a physical edition because it is decades old. There's other examples of this too, like Demon's Crest. You're going to be hard-pressed to find that game on the SNES itself for... I'm talking official. I'm not talking a reproduction cartridge. I'm talking an official release of it. You're going to be hard-pressed to find that for under $130. Generally, it's closer to $200. And there's a lot of other games like that as well, even games like the original Earthbound, which is usually upwards of $100 just for the cartridge. There are obviously some really good deals you can find on this stuff, but generally it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, even some of them have sold for close to $500, cartridge only, United States SNES version. Why am I talking about all this? What does this have to do with anything? Well, the Wii U shutdown is why people do this. This is why people emulate games. This is why they actually go on their computer and they run them on an emulator. It's because you can always get those files. There is always someone hosting those files. Legal or not, gamers want to be able to play their games. They want to be able to play their games after they're out, and they don't really like feeling like they paid for something that's taken away from them. I know there's a lot of people that are willing to accept this now, and I know even for me, certain games I play that are online only, you could say I'm guilty of that as well, because eventually those games will be rendered obsolete. But I know what I'm signing up for with that game now, right? If I play Fallout 76 tomorrow, and I know that in 10 years, if it never gets a patch to play offline, which I'm starting to doubt it will, the game will be dead. I know that it is a live service online game It's online only, and it's probably going to stay that way. My issue with the digital titles on something like the Wii U Marketplace or the PlayStation 3 Marketplace, which we talked about before when Sony was planning to shut that down and then they reversed that decision, or even titles online on the Xbox Marketplace, which at least they've done a pretty good job with their backwards compatibility. The idea when you buy those is that as long as you have a console that can connect to the internet and get on your account, you can always get those games back. You can always download those games again. Yes, there are faults with hardware. Eventually your Xbox 360 could go bad, or eventually your PlayStation 3 could go bad, and there are some games that are only on that. Even now, PlayStation 3 emulation is not perfect. It's finally gotten to a state where it's pretty good, and it's on a game-by-game basis for the PS3, right? Something like Metal Gear Solid 4, actually, people have gotten it running very, very well on emulation, even better than the PS3 copy, but for years, that wasn't the case. Many years, people could not get it running correctly or as good as the version on the PS3. It had a lot of issues. It takes time. It takes time for the consumer end of this technology to catch up. It takes time for people to be willing to put in the time and effort to create emulators, to create emulated versions of games that run on those emulators, and also to be willing to bite the bullet to host those files, because that is, at the end of the day, generally considered illegal. It's one thing if you download a copy of F-Zero on your own at your local Starbucks on a Wi-Fi hotspot. Nobody's probably going to care. It could happen, but most likely, no one's going to care. Now, that's not an advocacy for doing it, but it's just a reality that it doesn't really seem to affect much. But if you're the one hosting those files, it is very easy for companies to come after you, for companies like Nintendo to go after people hosting their game files online for games that are decades old that you might not even be able to purchase anymore. That's the issue that I have with all of this. We're hitting a point where you are creating artificial scarcity by removing these titles from the marketplace. But Jay, a lot of the N64 titles at least, and the SNES and NES titles that are good are on the Switch, and I can get those by paying for the Nintendo Switch Online membership. That's true, but you still don't actually have that file. I know there are semantics that people argue about, well, you don't own it anyway. You don't own the IP rights. You own a license to use it. Sure, but who's going to come into my house and remove the digital game from my console? Who's going to come into my house and take my copy of Metal Gear Solid 4 off of my shelf and say, hey, buddy, you only own a license for this. Give me that disc. Nobody. Nobody's going to do that. It just doesn't happen. The times when you lose your digital titles generally are if you get I've never had this happen to me, but say your Steam account gets hacked and taken from you, like somebody fishes for your password, gets it, and now that is their account. Well, now you don't have access to those games. Same thing can happen on any console, but generally no developer will come into your house at gunpoint. At least it hasn't happened yet. If it does happen, I want to know about it, because that would be a spicy meatball of a video. They will not come into your house at gunpoint or with lawyers or whatever and say, give me your disc-based copy you bought at Target of Assassin's Creed 3. Give me that. You don't own that game. You own a license. And they won't actually come in and, run a magnet, like a superpowered magnet over your Wii U and delete those games either. The thing with something like the SNES and the NES and the N64 versions of games on the Switch that you're paying for monthly is that it is basically like Netflix. You are allowed to click those games in that library and play them, but they are subject to change at any time. You're actually not even downloading the game to your own device. So you don't even have those files on the device to play it. If, say, there were to be some kind of, legal dispute or some kind of reason Nintendo wanted to remove a game from that eShop, from that actual virtual console type thing that they've created on the Switch, they can do that immediately. It's like banking on Dexter always being on Netflix, or banking on HBO Max always having a copy of a movie. Yes, you will probably always be able to find that movie somewhere, probably. There are movies you can't, same with games, but it might not necessarily always be on that platform. That's what you get when you sign up for subscription services, Disney Plus, everything. We all know that. We know what we signed up for. I don't think we really expect that with video games. It's something I'm getting very tired of with these marketplace issues, shutdowns, games being pulled due to licensing issues. I mean, it's not even always bad games. Like, it's not always games that are horrible that are pulled for licensing issues. Sometimes it's games people love, like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the game. You know, the actual video game of it that was on digital marketplaces for a long time that went unavailable for years. Even games like the Simpsons arcade game that showed up on the Xbox 360 store, and now it's gone. And now you have to buy an arcade cabinet just to play that game or emulate it. By the way, not an easy game to emulate, actually. Other games as well have had this same thing happen, where they might be hundreds of dollars for a physical edition, too. You know, I talked about some of those games. Another couple of games would be games like Mega Man Legends. I love those games. I know they're niche, but I love them. Those are hundreds of dollars generally for physical disc versions of them on the PlayStation 1, but on the PlayStation 3 store, they're about $9.99 US dollars, about $10. That is a really good way to get that. But we're hitting the point where for someone like me, and I know that I'm in a particularly different spot than some people with these games, because for me, I want to have access to these games for as long as I'm alive. And also I want to have access to these games for things I do for YouTube, like for this channel, for top fives, for video essays, for reviews. I want to have access to them for things like my secondary channel, Degenerate Plays, in the description down below, where we play all kinds of video games together with you guys. You know, that's something where I want to have access to these games. And I'm hitting the point where I'm wondering, like, do I need to start buying multiple copies of these consoles? I mean, because that's really expensive. But do I need to get 2 Wii U's in order to quick download all those games and then have them for the future in case the gamepad goes bad or my hard drive goes bad or something? Because at least then I'll have a backup console in my closet that'll buy me a handful of years. Do I need to eventually buy, an extra Sony PlayStation 3? Do I eventually need to get another one of those because for some reason they have some kind of weird allergy to bringing those games actually to the PS4 or PS5 and making them playable again, and the only other way to do it is to emulate them? I guess I just don't understand why you as a company would want to create these environments that encourage emulation, but then you take active stances against that, right? You take active stances against people preserving games themselves. I used to have a very, very different idea of this. My idea was always this, and it's not this anymore. So let me clarify that. My idea was always, well, it'll always be re-released at some point, and also the people that are emulating and illegally downloading this game or that game or whatever, they're just too cheap to buy it themselves. That was the corporate shill ideology I had of this 15 years ago when I was very young, of like, well, these companies know what they're doing. Like, obviously this game will come back. There's no way that that they'll just remove Marvel vs. Capcom 2 forever. It'll definitely come back. The problem is these things don't always come back. They don't always become available again. And then it falls on the consumer to preserve the games. This should not be our job as consumers. This should not be our job to sit up at night. Now, no one cares this much, but to be like, man, am I really not going to be able to play my copy of, Knights of the Old Republic in 10 years, things like that. It's like, that's not something you should have to worry about when you purchase these things. And especially when you purchase the disc. It's really disappointing because this is what I'm talking about when I say that I don't love digital. Digital is great for certain things. It is great for the countries where you are price gouged the hell out of video games for import taxes and other stuff. I feel for you on that. That's some BS. That's just stupid. It's great for you. It's great for people in areas where they have good enough internet to download stuff, but maybe not great shopping, but they still have a decent income. There are a lot of people like that. It's also great for people who are maybe immunocompromised or who have really bad social anxiety disorder issues, or even people who just need to save space in their house. Things like that, great for. But if the whole premise is that you're always going to be able to get that game, you're always going to have it, it's going to be preserved for you, then that should be the case. If you're going to shut down these marketplaces, you always need to have a way to re-download that stuff in the future. The Wii U will have a way for the foreseeable future, they did say, to download the things that you have purchased. Okay, this is the same plan that Sony had for the PlayStation 3. But my big issue for that is for the foreseeable future. At what point does that go away? At what point are you no longer able to download things? At what point does it go the way of the original Wii, where there were classic virtual shop games on there that a lot of people owned? I have friends like Nate who bought, a dozen games on there, and then his Wii went kaput and now he can't get them. What happens eventually to that? Because if you're putting the money in, you should be able to access that product later. It's not a burger that should go bad sitting out on your table. It is a video game. It is a piece of media. And it's ridiculous that this is still an issue today. And it really does add sympathy to the people hosting and downloading these files and emulating and doing all this stuff. Like, it really makes you understand their point of view. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Nate and I will be doing a deep dive on the Wii U in 2022, and probably near future here. I want to make that soon, same way we did with the Xbox 360 and the PS3 last year. We're going to be taking a look back at that console. And there are other ways to play a lot of these games. If you're willing to put the money in and you really want to own legitimate copies of them, the retro gaming marketplace is kind of a disaster, but I do have the Retron 5. I love that console. It can play all these different old games, but you need the cartridges and stuff for it. It's just disappointing to see this kind of stuff still being an issue now, but there are alternatives. It's just that they get ridiculously expensive. Interested to hear your thoughts down below. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.